Yo, it's Guido coming at you with the Tactics Talk. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for the support of the channel. Fantastic. Some more topical stuff. Let's take a look at today turrets versus armor. And I think a line that really illustrates this well is the two American TD lines that end in the 110E3 and the 110E4. So we have the 110E4 here, sporting the Major Ram camo, or 3D style, very cool. Or the 110E3 here, sporting the Welsh Blues camo, very cool. So the question then becomes, armor or turret? A turret is more flexible. I think everybody can understand that right off the bat. But the 110E4 has a balancing factor there between that and the 110E3, because this is one of the basic mechanics of the game. If you gave turreted tanks as much armor as you give some of the casemate TDs, then that would make them much better than the casemate because of the flexibility of the turret. So the 110E4 is going to have, and does have, less armor. The 110E3 has more armor, but it doesn't have a turret. The turret makes a tank much more flexible in World of Tanks, but there is an X factor to armor, because the ability to absorb shots and not take damage allows you to get to the mid and to the late game where you can be more effective. Both of these tanks, and to a large extent both of these lines, especially at the tier 8, and especially 9 and 10, have a fear factor because of big guns, 750 alpha guns. And we'll talk about the lines in just a second if you're trying to make that decision on which line to go up. So if you have a 750 alpha gun and you have a bunch of armor and you're able to have some staying power, that X factor of the armor allows you to stay in the game and be a little bit maybe more effective by presence, even if perhaps you aren't as effective by damage or flexibility like the 110E4 is. So let me know down below, armor or turret, which one do you go for? We're going to dig into this a bit and see which one I come up with, and we'll talk about the pros and cons. First thing we're going to talk about, though, are the choices you have on the American line as you're going up the two TD lines, because it does split off at tier 5. So let's talk about that. When you finish the tier 5 Wolverine, as you can see here in the tech tree, it is going to split off and you've got a choice to make. Do I go for the armored casemate beasts ending in the 110E3, or do I switch off and go to the more mobile, at least initially, turreted, more flexible line? So starting at the Wolverine. The first two you go to, the Hellcat and the Jackson, both have a turret. The Jackson has slightly more armor. The Hellcat is virtually zero armor. This is one of the more iconic tanks in the game. So if you're looking for the flexibility of the turret, you want to play that iconic Hellcat tier 6, you might want to go up the turreted line. If you're looking for more of the assault TD, and it will take you a little while to get to that kind of tank, talk about that in a minute, which starts at the T28, you're going to take the Jackson, which has a turret, and then you're going to lose the turret at tier 7 for the rest of the tanks up into the 110E3. So let's talk about each one of these very quickly. The Jackson and the Hellcat we're going to cover together. They're both similar tanks, except that the Hellcat is much faster. Similar tanks, the Hellcat is much faster. It did get a nerf a while back. It's not quite as beastly as it was. There is a Super Hellcat version at tier 6, which is a premium, which has some of the characteristics of the old Hellcat, but it is still a very mobile, very interesting turreted TD. The Jackson is the slower cousin with a little bit of armor. I say a little bit because it's not amazing in the armor department. Let's go ahead and head up the 110E3 line then with the T110E3, which I quite like. It's quite mobile for a casemate TD. It doesn't have a whole bunch of armor. It's not fantastically armored. And like I said, it's not till tier 8 where you start to get that very seriously armored casemate gameplay feel. So moving on to the tier 8, we have the T28 with a relatively fast firing, pretty nice gun actually. Let's just click on this and take a quick look. We get up to 120 millimeter and we're doing 400, 248 average pen, and the rate of fire is 6.59, which is actually pretty darn fast for such a hard-hitting gun. T95 is where we get into the 155, and we're starting to talk about that 750 alpha that I was talking about earlier. You will note that the T95, the T30, and the 110E3 and the 110E4 all carry the 750 alpha big stick. That's as big a stick as the American TD line gets. So you move from the T28, which is pretty decently armored, to the T95, which is fantastically armored. And we talked about that big gun on that thing. This is a very tough nut to crack indeed, the T95 right there. And it only gets stronger armor-wise when we get up to the 110E3, which is the next one in the list. Going down to the other line, the Hellcat we talked about already. The T95 then is going to lose some of the mobility that the Hellcat has. It's going to gain a little bit of armor, and it's actually got a pretty nice gun on it as well. We look at that and it gets to the 90 millimeter, and we're talking 240 alpha with 170 penetration, which is a little bit low for a TD, but this is the trade-off. You're getting a turret with some flexibility, so some of the other stats you might expect a TD to have are going to be a little bit less. When we get to the prototype T28, it is a turreted T28, essentially the same hull with a turret on top. It also gets the 120 with 400 average damage, 248 pen, which is quite nice. 297 with gold, and the 400 alpha. Great gun. It's quite slow. The frontal armor is actually decent, not amazing, but it does have quite a few weak spots. For example, the turret here, this flat face right here, is quite easily pinned. And while it does have a turret and it does have mobility, it's not the most mobile of tanks. When we get to the T30 here, we're going to get a little bit more mobility, but it's still relatively sluggish, and we get that big old T29, T30 American kind of turret, and this becomes quite the hold-down monster. The hull is quite soft, but you're carrying the 155 millimeter AT-T7 with the 750 alpha, 276 standard pen, 320 if you dab 2, and that thing can hurt, although the reload time on it is quite long indeed. And then it goes to the 110E4, and we'll break down the 110E3 and the 110E4 next. So that is the line. You're making your decision at the Wolverine. Here's the good news. Keep smashing into my mic. Here's the good news. You can unlock both lines. Right? So when you unlock one of them, do not ditch the Wolverine. Keep it around, play it a bit, get the experience for the other line, start the other line, or at least unlock the next one, whether or not you buy it, because I think my recommendation is to get both. We'll talk about which one I like best when we get to the end. But keep that tank at tier 5, unlock both lines, and then when you feel like you can go up the other one, you'll be ready. All right, let's break down both the 110E3 and the 110E4 separately. This is one of the more interesting comparisons, actually, that I think I've done, because it's essentially the same tank. One has a turret, one doesn't. Same hull, same gun. Very interesting, and you can really sort of see the balancing decisions that Wargaming has when they make these vehicles. As I've said, and will continue to say, the turret gives it more flexibility, the armor gives it more staying power. You don't want to have every tank have both. I mean, you would like to if you're a player, of course you want that, but for balance's sake, we've got to make these decisions. So as we go down for the 110E3 and 110E4, you'll notice they're both carrying the same gun, the 750 alpha gun. They both have the same penetration, but the rate of fire changes. The 110E3 actually has more DPM, a higher rate of fire. Gun loading, i.e. it loads faster, right? The same alpha, that means it has to load faster if it's going to have more DPM, and that is what's going on right here. Gun traverse is a little bit tricky because the 27.12 is within a 8-degree arc on the casemate. That's all you've got, so it's pretty quick to move the gun around. Whereas the 110E4 is talking about the turret movement, which is quite slow at 18.77. Most turreted TDs have very slow turrets as part of the balancing decisions right there. Also note, the turret only goes 90 degrees to the side. It does not go all the way around. That can be tricky in circling situations or trying to shoot to the side. Gun depression and elevation is different as well, more balancing decisions. The 110E3 actually has -8, whereas the E4 has -6, and -6 can be a little bit tricky to use. So nice flexible turret, but only -6 and only +12 on the elevation. That's a big gun, so moving it around in that turret is not easy as far as elevating up and down. The breach is going to be way back in there. All right, aiming time is better on the 110E3, another balancing decision at 2.4, and then the dispersion is the same for it being basically the same gun. There's the average DPM I talked about, 27 and some change for the E3 and less at 2400 for the E4. 50 more hit points for the E3, a little bit more robust, and now we get into the armor situation. 305 is fantastic on the whole of the 110E3. It is just a well-armored tank. There is sort of a weak spot, more so on the 110E4. We'll get to that in just a minute, and it really is the cupola up top, which is quite important on these two tanks. The 110E4's hull is at 260, no slouch, but pennable by a lot more things than 305 is, to be sure. Only 203 on the turret, only 203. You dab 2 with a lot of tier 8s, and you have a chance of going through the turret, provided you avoid the mantlet. And then, of course, the massive weak spot. Like I said, we'll get to that in a minute. Mobility is certainly different. Another bouncing decision. Typically, the turreted TD type tanks will be faster. This one it's a lighter tank at 64, whereas the 110E3 has more armor. That's where the weight comes in right there. So specific power is much better for the 110E4, and it gets up to 35, which is pretty good. Backs up at 10, which is 2 kilometers an hour faster than the 110E3. The 110E3 is very painful to back up. It just does not back up very well. Traverse speed is a little bit better on the 110E4. It's a lighter tank. That's where you're getting the bonuses in the maneuver and the mobility areas. Concealment is not great on either one of them, even though they're TDs. They're great big tanks, so there's not a whole lot of great concealment going on. The 110E4 is a little bit smaller and squatter, I guess. I don't know why there would necessarily really be a difference. Maybe they take into account the moving turret as, motion or something unknown. And then both have a decent view range of 390, which is actually quite good for a TD. Definitely good for a TD, and a lot of your tier 10s are right about there. So what do we have on this comparison? Basically, we have the flexibility of the 110E4 with less DPM, more maneuverability. We have the armor of the 110E3 with more DPM and less maneuverability. That's the big picture on the comparison. Those are the choices you're going to be making, and generally that follows down through the tech tree decisions that you're going to make to get to these, because it's a similar situation across. If you compare each one of the tier type tanks, the casemate versus the turreted one on those two lines, you'll find a very similar situation going on. Let's take a quick look at the old nodule on the top of the cranium there, because it's actually quite important and quite different between the tanks. One of the biggest differences in the armor models on these is the quite large cupola on the top. This is the 110E3, 322 or so millimeters, red. Good upper case. We talked about the hull being very nice, lots of red, nice big mantlet, very difficult tank to pen. And the 110E4, which has the same little cupola, but oddly is less armored at only 182 or so. This is easily penned by nearly anything that it sees, especially if they press 2 if they're a tier 8. Why is that important? Because when you're going hull down on these things or coming over a ridge, that's the first thing they see. And when you're hull down, it's just popping up there anyway. People will be shooting at this on your 110E4. If they are unwise and you're driving the 110E3, they will be shooting at that. Right? So that is the biggest difference. I wanted to show that. Extremely important right there on the armor model, that the 110E3's cupola is nigh impenetrable. There's a few tanks that can dab 2 and pen that thing, but my goodness, it is strong. Not so much on your 110E4. All right. I'm going to have a couple gameplay examples, just quick examples to show you the strengths of the armor side and the strengths of the turret side for these two tanks. But let's take a quick look at how I've done in them and my stats so far. 50 battles in the 110E3, 212 in the 110E4, both sitting at 60% win rate at 870 or over 800 average XP. I would much rather that be close to 1,000. I find that casemate TDs are hard to carry in, and hence I tend to have less XP in those than other tier 10s. On the 110E3, we're looking at 2,100 average damage per game, whereas the 110E4 is at 2838. The 110E3 is 1.25 on ratio, destruction ratio 168, armor use 1.09. Anytime you get to an armor use of 1 or more, that is a heavily armored tank, whereas the 110E4 is at 0.59. Decently armored, but more situational. More destruction, more damage ratio on both of those, with similar hit percentages at 77 for the E4 and 80% for the E3. What can we garner from all this? Well, I can do more damage than the 110E4. Why? Because a turret is more flexible. I soak up more damage than the 110E3 and potentially have more influence by presence. Why? Because it has better armor. I think these numbers really kind of tell the story of those two tanks. And most people will find that that is what they get. The 110E4 is going to give them more damage, but they're going to take more hits. Obviously, the 110E3 is going to have a little harder time taking things down and dealing out the damage, but it will soak up and be alive by presence. Now, the battle survives only 32% on the E3, and it's 36 on the 110E4, which is an interesting little slight difference on those two. Small sample sizes, especially on the E3. So just a quick look at the stats. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about armor-wise and what I'm talking about turret-wise, and then we'll come to a conclusion. First, we'll cover the 110E3. You can see we are here on Himmel's Mines, and we've got some E100s. And right off the bat, I bounce a shot. Boom, 750 alpha bounced. We get a little bit of damage. I do have a pattern on my left side I need to watch out for. This other E100 decides to come in. Don't quite reload. And down goes the object 430. So we've got 750 bounced. I have another highly armored tank with me. I'm able to put a shot into him. There's that bounce. Looks like the other E100 is carrying the smaller gun. Now you'll notice right there that I actually shifted my armor just a little bit, and I'm going to show you why here, because the front end of this tank is, or the front armor is quite curved. So if you can bait them into shooting the far side, it's even more curved, and you're going to get an auto bounce. You do have to be careful though, because if I angle too much and they get into that right lower side, it flat plates it a little bit. But you'll notice that they're having a hard time getting over there because of the side of the hill, and now the dead tank that's right there adding some more armor. So these guys are working against us. Grinny's moving back and forth from Grindler Gaming. This was on stream, and she's trying to bait shots, give me an opportunity to push in there. I can't push too far forward, unfortunately, because I have the Patton sitting over there, and pretty soon there'll be something else that's going to come up. Now there's the okay-ish pen trying to get into that recently buffed flat part of the front of the E100 turret. I only have 295 or so, so I'm going to have a hard time penning with my standard round. So he's trying to do the same thing and get me to shoot. He's not going to show his lower plate unless he absolutely has to. He's going to wait for a shot. Now this is that presence thing, right? Nobody wants to take a 750 alpha shot. Very highly armored 110E3. He'd rather not come out unless he knows he can take a shot without me hitting him. And I think I'm going to give an opportunity, because I'm going to try to go for a shot there up under his wheel, but I wait a little long, and now I'm just going to have to back out. There's that very slow backup speed of 8 kilometers an hour. Just takes forever for this thing to back out. We're up to 2,560 bounced. Try to get in there and sneak a shot, take that guy down. And now we're, like I said, 2,500 something bounced. So that's what I wanted to show you there. I'll get something like 3,000 by the time this is done, and we end up winning this battle. Even though it looks like we're losing, again, this is that armor and staying power by presence. The mouse has the same thing in spades. Two of us working together. We're actually behind in this game. We're going to come back from this using the armor of these two tanks and the teamwork and win. But that is basically, in a nutshell, right there, the strength of the 110E3. Let's take a look at the flexibility of the turret on the 110E4. On Mannheim, Himmelsdorf here, headed down to the south, have a good crowd platooning with Pilgrim, who's actually in a 110E3. So he's going to go over there and use that thing's great hold down capability, and Granny from Grindler Gaming in a Scout. So we're going to watch as I use the turret here to give myself a little more flexibility. So we'll come out here, come around this corner, we can take that shot and back out. Now that is not something a 110E3 can do. The 110E3 is going to have to come out, do a big shift, take a shot, and back out and shift, whereas you can do the standard peek and poke with the turret, provided you're not looking more than 90 degrees with the 110E4, because it can't go more than 90. This is more of a heavy tank kind of situation right here. And this tank can be played to a large extent like a heavy tank, although you have to be careful. You have to be careful to not get overextended. So we'll back out here. This other mouse is coming in. All right, so now my turret is able to shift to the right. I don't have to take the whole casemate and shift to the right to get that shot. It's just more flexible. However, remember, the armor is a thing, and that other 110E4, and now the mouse are going to come in there, and they're going to have a lot of opportunities to get into my lower hull. This would be a very difficult spot right here for a 110E3 to use. Now he could stare. If I was on a 110E3, I could stare in that direction, but I would not have nearly the flexibility in there to fight like I want to right here. So I'm just trying to get a little bit of angle. He does take a shot on the mouse that saves me some hit points, but of course I've lost the mouse now. So we're just going to keep on working this corner, try to put some angles on it. You still want to try to give some angles because of that lower plate is curved and the armor on this thing is decent. Now there's a bounce. Looks like he went for, it's hard to tell, but it looked like he was aiming to me anyway for that big cupola. Remember we talked about that. The 110E4's cupola is very bad. Here comes the other 110E4, and he puts a big hit on me. I'm not going to reload in time. Just trying to get a bounce. I don't. So now I've taken some pretty significant hits, and I've got half my hit points gone right here. Trying to deal with the mouse and the 110E4. Now the other 110E4 is going to, when he pokes up, notice he's using his turret, right? He's coming up with his hold going one direction, turret looking the other, gives him some flexibility. Also, though, and in addition to, he is exposing his cupola as he comes up and over. So it's a great example of what happens with this particular tank when you're trying to come from a hold down position like that. It's a strong position for both those guys. I'm checking what's going on at the 6 o'clock back there. Strong position for both those guys, but they do have to come up somewhat for me to get a shot, or for them to get a shot, and I may get a shot on them. So here comes the mouse again. Just the flexibility, right? I'm able to shift my hull a little bit. I can get my turret online. It's not as clumsy as the casemate is. I can come out here and maybe get a little shot on this guy. There we go, and we just take a shot into the corner. Notice I dabbed 2. That gave me more pen, so I'm able to handle the flat plate of the mouse. The pen on that then going up to 375, which is, that's a lot. Very, very nice when you dab 2. All right, so that's what I wanted to show you with the turret. Now let's go back, think of the stats, the things I've said, the stats, the amount of games I've played in each particular tank, and I think you're probably getting an idea of which one I prefer. But let's wrap this up. Well, my friends, the winner is, for me, the 110E4. I recommend both lines. I like the flexibility of the 110E4. I quite like the whole line. The T30 is an absolute gem at tier 9. But if you are an assault TD guy, you can't go far wrong from a T28, then the T95, the Doom Turtle, and onto the 110E3. I don't know if the 110E3 has a nickname. It should. I don't know how you get better than Doom Turtle, but Doom Turtle's big brother, I don't know. Doom Tortoise, who knows? Who knows? Should be something good. But I choose the 110E3. Let me know what you guys think down below. Which line did you go up first? Which tank do you like the best? Turret or no turret? That is the question. Thanks for coming by, guys. I appreciate the support. As I said earlier, have a good day, and we will see ya.